French President Emmanuel Macron has balanced praise and criticism of China on his first visit to Beijing since winning office last year. But with more than 50 corporate executives in tow, it is very clear his priority on this week's trip is simple: securing more business in the Middle Kingdom. So while he warned President Xi Jinping that China had to share the benefits of its growing economic ties with Europe and allow for more balanced cooperation, his most important message was in delivering France's commitment to the Belt and Road Initiative, Beijing's huge international infrastructure investment plan that reaches from the Pacific to the Atlantic. This was doubtless music to Xi's ears. The Chinese president, who secured his position as China's most powerful leader since Mao Zedong at last October's Communist Party Congress, knows well how China's growing influence in the world is based upon its economic strength. But Macron and other European Union leaders may be missing a chance to be a bit more assertive. With the unilateralist US President Donald Trump pulling back from international cooperation such as in the Paris Climate Agreement, China needs to work closer with other partners still committed to multilateralism. And none is more powerful than the EU, for all its internal differences. Macron closely follows other EU leaders in his emphasis on begging Beijing for business. German Chancellor Angela Merkel has viewed her regular trips to China as among her most important international visits for over a decade. British Prime Minister Theresa May wanted to visit last October but was asked by Beijing to wait to avoid clashing with Trump's sojourn. However, she plans a trip to meet Xi later this month and has in the meantime brought her Beijing-friendly predecessor David Cameron out of retirement to head the UK's cooperation on the BRI. The Brexit process may have reduced Britain's allure to Beijing by cutting its influence in the world's biggest common market, but China remains as attractive as ever to London. To be fair, Macron approaches China with a more critical line than his counterparts. He campaigned in last year's presidential election with slogans calling for limits on globalization, especially on the export of French jobs to places like China. And he has injected greater urgency into EU-wide moves to strengthen controls on Chinese investments in the EU so that the authorities can intervene not only in defense and defense-related sectors but across a broader front. As the French president said in Beijing at a joint news conference with Xi, we the EU need to have a more coordinated approach to give China more visibility. We want to facilitate Chinese investments in Europe in predefined sectors. Turning to the Chinese leader, he added, just as you want to facilitate European investments in sectors you will have defined. The somewhat tortuous phrases highlight the extreme care Macron was taking to avoid giving offense to his powerful host. But the meaning was clear: open China's markets a bit more, face growing restraints in the EU. Market access remains European companies' top gripe in China. The numbers suggest they have a point, with Chinese investment in the EU soaring recently and hitting $41 billion in 2016, while EU investment in China hobbles along at a low level $8 billion in the same year. The moves toward a tougher common European approach to Chinese investment in the EU suggest France and others are finally getting serious about squeezing a better deal out of Beijing. It is a good time to try. Trump largely refrained from attacking China on trade issues during his visit to Beijing, probably because he needs Xi's cooperation in dealing with North Korea. But he has made up for it since, with his administration preparing trade sanctions against China on many fronts, ranging from aluminum to finance. In launching his national security strategy last month, the US president emphasized the importance of economic competition with China, saying, "We are declaring that America is in the game and America is going to win." As the greatest beneficiary of the multilateral trade system in recent decades, China has every interest in defending it for as long as possible in the face of Trump's threats. It may surpass the US as the world's largest economy in gross domestic product terms in the next decade or so, assuming current growth rates continue. But it will take until the middle of the century, if not longer, before the per-head income levels of Chinese people can match Americans. The EU is a mature economy, but, with its plethora of member states, it too benefits greatly from multilateral economic cooperation. With the US veering into nationalism, it will become an even more important ally for China. This is not wishful thinking. It is a matter of shared interest in an open world economy. Moreover, Xi has in principle, committed himself to increase global cooperation, notably in his speech at the Davos World Economic Forum last year. The EU needs to stick to its core ideals in this dialogue, not least over human rights. China is consciously promoting a worldview in which countries do not intervene in each other's internal affairs, rejecting the universality of Western values. The EU needs to make clear, albeit politely, that it sees things differently. More immediately, EU leaders now need to hold Xi to his word on economic issues, not in generalizations but in concrete ways. It is, for example, high time that Beijing permitted big foreign companies to hold controlling stakes in their Chinese ventures. The era of the 5050 split with a compulsory handover of intellectual property should be over. Such changes would, of course, not only benefit European companies but others, including American groups. Who knows, a bit more flexibility could even help Xi calm Trump down. These arguments are hardly new in the EU, but EU leaders need to show a bit more courage in implementing them and a bit more cooperation in their approach to Beijing. Paris, London and Berlin ultimately damage their own interests when they compete too hard with each other for Beijing's favors. Stefan Wagstall is comment editor of the Nikkei Asian Review and a former Berlin bureau chief of the Financial Times.